We like to say, well, no one's perfect. I understand why we say this. We say it when someone, or our own selves or someone else, has failed to meet some standard that we might have expected them, or ourselves, to have met. We say it when someone, perhaps ourselves, has made a mistake, and we say it to be gracious and forgiving. You don't want to pretend the mistake didn't happen, or that what happened wasn't a mistake, because acknowledging mistakes helps us make them less likely to recur. At the same time, we want to minimize the shame. So we normalize the mistake and say, no one's perfect. It's a good way to avoid, on the one hand, shaming, and on the other hand, complacency, allowing our energies directed toward growth and intention to flag. A life of purpose and intention is directed toward realizing purposes and intentions not already realized. It's got direction and movement. At the same time, there's room in such a life for appreciating the beauty of what does already exist, the wonder and grace of the world and of ourselves, just as we are. And so we try to strike a balance between moving forward and stopping to smell the flowers. At one extreme, there's being so goal-oriented and driven that the goals have no point because we're never going to enjoy them. If everything is an instrument and nothing is a good in itself, then the instruments have nothing to be instruments for. At the other extreme, there's being complacent, useless. You might be in a la-la land of bliss, but not good for anything. So we see ourselves as negotiating our way between those extremes, seeking a life of both drive and accomplishment and inner peace and equanimity, alternating between getting things done and appreciating what is. But what if we didn't alternate? What if every moment of getting things done was also a moment that we could appreciate, not just for what it was headed toward, but for what it already is in that moment? What if perfect weren't conceived of as a static state of affairs, unchanging with no possibility or need for further growth, where any change would be a deviation from the perfection, and instead, perfection were conceived of as dynamic, as itself in motion, rolling, moving forward? Then, instead of saying no one's perfect, we might rather say everyone's perfect. Everything is perfect. Think of a newborn baby, normal and healthy. There's a picture on the front of your order of service to help you imagine one or remember. The new parents are thinking, they're saying to each other, she's perfect. And they don't mean that she has achieved a static, unchanging perfection. They trust that she will be, and already is imperceptibly at the moment they lovingly gaze upon her, growing and changing. Almost 44 years ago now, my daughter Morgan was born and placed in my arms. She was perfect. Almost 42 years ago now, my son John was born, and I held him, and he was perfect. When did they stop being perfect? Catholic orthodoxy has a clear and precise answer to that question. At age 7. At age 7, you enter the age of reason, according to Catholic teaching, and you can make moral distinctions. Whatever you did before that was not a sin because you were too young to know what you were doing. The instant you turn 7, you are capable of sin, and you probably commit at least one on your 7th birthday, and from then on, you're no longer perfect. That is not our theology, and it is not my experience. Morgan and John grew, and there were challenges. They became teenagers, and there were challenges. They made mistakes, but not mistakes in some objective or cosmic sense. There are no mistakes in an ultimate sense. There's only what we call mistakes in order to tell ourselves, okay, that's not in line what I was trying for here. In that sense, identifying what to call a mistake, identifying what's out of line with what we were trying for, is an essential part of how we grow. And if we are now conceiving of perfection as dynamic, as including our own growth and change, perfection as being in process, then identifying what to call a mistake is a part of the process of perfection. Not the process of becoming perfect, the process that already at each moment manifests perfection. The thing we call mistakes are a part of our perfection. And that perspective began to dawn on me sometime around what in my life is the graduations era. Morgan's graduation from high school, and then a couple of years later, John's, and then Morgan's graduation from college, and then John's. And during those years, I would find myself remembering how perfect they were when they were born. And I was starting to see that they never stopped being perfect. And if they never stopped being perfect, neither did I. Neither did you. Having the capacity for change and growth and learning is a key part of what makes them perfect just as they are. The Japanese Zen teacher Shunryu Suzuki once addressed his congregation and told them, "Each of you is perfect just as you are, and you could use a little improvement." This is not paradoxical. This is not a matter of this perspective and this opposite perspective and somehow trying to hold both opposing perspectives in mind at the same time. No, being on a path of growth and change and learning simply is what is perfect about a person. Being perfect, however, doesn't mean we can be everything. We have our gifts, and with them come our shadows. We have our vulnerability, our woundedness, our brokenness. And I'd like to say 2 things about that. First, that the shadow is necessary for the gift. Being not so good at X is what allows you to be good at Y. The so-called weakness is what makes the strength possible. And second, I want to go a step farther than that. Not just that the weakness makes the strength possible, but the weakness is the strength. The part of you that seems broken is itself your gift to the world. It is your blessed affliction. And so for the first point, consider this. Malcolm Gladwell's book, Outliers, looked at a variety of fields and discovered a kind of magic number, 10,000 hours. He became famous for that number. 10,000 hours, he said, is what it takes to really become outstanding at something. A dedicated athlete or scientist, a musician or dancer can sustain focused, intense practice or study for maybe 20 hours a week, so it takes 10 hours to get to 10,000. It takes 10 years to get to 10,000 hours. Whether there's really something magic about 10,000 hours or whatever the number is, what this reminds us is that no one can be good at everything. We get good at it by doing it, and we're inclined to do it if we think we're pretty good at it, and the hours you put into sharpening your tremolo technique on guitar were hours you were not practicing your jump shot. You can't be everything. Whatever your gift, every gift comes with its shadow. What we aren't and don't makes possible what we are and do. As our congregation begins its year-long search for your next minister, I'd like you to understand that your new minister, in a year, if all goes well, will be perfect. And also won't be everything. The great Universalist minister, Reverend Clinton Lee Scott, illustrates the competing qualities that congregations seem to want in their minister. Scott's parable for pulpit committees goes like this. Now it came to pass that while the elder in Israel tarried in Babylon, a message came to him from a distant city, saying, "Come thou and counsel with us. Help us to search out a priest, for the one that has served us has gone mad." And the elder in Israel arose and journeyed to that distant land. And when the men of affairs were assembled, the elder spake unto them, saying, "What manner of man seeketh thee to be your new priest?" And they answered and said to him, "We seek a young man, yet with the wisdom of gray hairs, one that speaketh his mind freely, yet giveth offense to no one, that draweth the multitude to the temple on the Sabbath, but will not be displeased when we ourselves are absent. We desire one who has a gay mood, yet is of sober mind, that seeketh out dark sayings and prophecies, yet speaketh not over our heads, that filleth the temple up, builded up, yet defileth not the sanctuary with a motley assortment of strangers. We seeketh one that puts the instruction of the young first, but requireth not that we become teachers, that causeth the treasury to prosper, yet asketh not that we give more of our substance. Verily, we seek a prophet that will be unto us a leader, but will not seek to change us, for we like not to be disturbed. Sometimes we say, well, no one's perfect, when the point really might be better expressed as no one simultaneously exhibits contradictory qualities. If your gift is the wisdom of experience, it's not a fault if you have youthful exuberance. That you don't have youthful exuberance. If your gift is youthful exuberance, it's not a fault to not have the wisdom of experience. If your gift is speaking your mind freely, it's not a fault that you occasionally give offense. And if your gift is diplomacy, it's not a fault that you don't speak your mind freely. If your gift is being tall enough to dunk a basketball, it's not a fault that you aren't small enough to be comfortable in the backseat of a subcompact car. Not a fault, but we might say it's the shadow side of your gift. It's the thing that you aren't and don't that makes possible what you are and do. So the first point is that the shadow is not some unfortunate, if forgivable, shortcoming. The shadow is the necessary enabling condition of the gift. And now, let's go a little farther with that. The shadow is not merely what makes the gift possible, but actually, in some cases, is the gift itself. Our brokenness may be the very thing that is our strength. The weakness is the strength. Here's a story that illustrates. It's a story that Dr. Rachel Remen tells about a patient of hers, a young man who lost his leg. His leg had to be removed at the hip to save him from bone cancer. She writes, "He was 24 years old when I started working with him, and he was a very angry man with a lot of bitterness. He felt a deep sense of injustice and a very deep hatred for all well people, because it seemed so unfair to him that he had suffered this terrible loss so early in life. Over the course of more than 2 years, slowly a profound shift began. He came to look beyond himself, to reach out to others who had suffered severe physical losses, and to make visits. One time, he visited a young woman who was almost his own age. It was a hot day in California. He was in running shorts, and his artificial leg showed as he entered the hospital room. The young woman had lost both her breasts to cancer, and she was so depressed that she would not even look at him. The nurses had left a radio playing, so to get her attention, he unstrapped his leg and began dancing around the room on one leg, snapping his fingers to the music. She looked at him in amazement, and then she burst out laughing. And she said, "Man, if you can dance, then I can sing." A year later, Remen says, we sat down to review our work together. He talked about what was significant to him, and then I shared what was significant in our process. And as we were reviewing our 2 years of work together, I opened his file and there discovered several drawings that he had made early on. I handed them to him. He looked at them and said, "Oh, look at this." He showed me one of his earliest drawings. I had suggested to him that he draw a picture representing his body. He had drawn a picture of a vase, and running through the vase was a deep black crack. This was the image of his body, and he had taken a black crayon and had drawn the crack over and over again. He was grinding his teeth with rage at the time. It was a very, very painful thing because it seemed to him that this vase could never function as a vase again. It could never hold water. And now, several years later, he came to this picture and looked at it and said, "Oh, this one isn't finished." And I said, extending the box of crayons, "Why don't you finish it?" He picked a yellow crayon and putting his finger on the crack, he said, "You see here where it's broken? This is where the light comes through." And with the yellow crayon, he drew light streaming through the crack in his body. That man's one-leggedness became the way that he was able to shine in this world. The brokenness is the gift. This, however, is not easy to see. Often we think we should not have that brokenness. And it's always the shoulds that plague us. After all, what would there be to bother us about losing a leg except the thought that we should have 2 of them? Does it bother you that you don't have wings and can't fly? Yet that's what Laura Kim says too. But for me, I find that inability to fly doesn't bother me much because I don't have in my head the idea that I should be able to fly. Get over the idea that we should have 2 legs, and one-leggedness won't bother us either. Brokenness, affliction boil down to this: failure. Failure is always relative to the success we think we should be having. We failed, or something failed us. Our bodies failed, relationships failed, our job failed, our brain failed. There was a failure of something in ourselves or in our world to be what we were so sure it should be, was supposed to be. Brokenness, the blessing of our affliction, arrives as failure. Somewhere in growing up, our lives became as a vase, shellacked with should until opaque, and the light within us does not shine out until something breaks us. Some very important should fails, and we crack. We break open. is a book by James Ford, who is both a Unitarian Universalist minister and a Zen master. It's titled, "If You're Lucky, Your Heart Will Break." That's a great title, for in that breaking is the chance to find yourself and your light. Ram Dass, born Richard Alpert, had a stroke in 1997 at age 65. The stroke left him with expressive aphasia. He lost the ability to speak fluently, and he also became wheelchair-bound. He called the stroke fierce grace. He wrote, "For me to see the stroke as grace required a perceptual shift. I used to be afraid of things like strokes, but I've discovered that the fear of the stroke was worse than the stroke itself. Since the stroke, I can say to you with an assurance I couldn't have felt before that faith and love are stronger than any changes, stronger than aging, and I am sure stronger than death." Ram Dass also said, "The ego is like my wheelchair. It's a beautiful wheelchair. Use it, enjoy it. Just don't think it's you. Don't take yourself so personally." Don't take yourself so personally. That is easier said than done. It's not easy to maintain a helpful and functional ego while at the same time not identifying with it. Moreover, don't take yourself so personally easily becomes one more should in life, which undermines the point. Accepting yourself means accepting even the parts of you that aren't self-accepting. The question, though, is, am I learning what life is trying to show me about the ground of what is? Or am I jumping from one delusion to another, or clinging miserably to the same one? Pema Chodron says, "We can let the circumstances of our lives harden us so that we become increasingly resentful and afraid, or we can let them soften us and make us kinder and more open to what scares us. We always have this choice." The blessing of affliction is offered. May our hearts receive it. Amen.